Imagine setting foot on a new land full of promises and potential, only to disappear without a trace. A group of over 100 English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island in 1587, dreaming of a new life in a new world. 3 years later, when their governor returned with supplies, he found nothing but an eerie word, Croatoan, carved into a post.
Where did they go? Were they wiped out by Native Americans? Did they try to sail back to England only to be lost at sea? Or did they integrate into the very tribes they once sought to colonize? Today on Zumundous, we're going to dive deep into America's oldest and most puzzling mystery, the disappearance of the Lost Colony of Roanoke.
Zumundous.
And welcome to Zumundous Podcast, episode number 14. I'm Doolin.
And I'm Keith.
And today we're going to talk about one of history's greatest mysteries. That would be the Lost Colony of Roanoke.
Yeah.
And this one has stumped historians for years, and they're still talking about it. I remember hearing about this like back when I was a kid.
Me too.
And like I read comic books and stuff that had like the mystery of the Lost Colony was kind of tied into it. So even from from an early age, I was always kind of fascinated by the Lost Colony.
I remember hearing about it in school, and they were like, "Oh, it's a big mystery. Nobody knows." And then when I learned about it, it wasn't as I don't know, far-fetched as I thought it would be. But yeah, it wasn't like a scary mystery per se. But
we'll break down the myths and the facts here in today's episode.
Yeah, totally.
So as I mentioned earlier, this story goes back to 1585 with Sir Walter Raleigh, and he organized the first attempt to colonize Roanoke Island, which is on present-day North Carolina. You said it was Cape Hatteras, right?
It's next to Cape Hatteras. It's right in between the mainland and Cape Hatteras is Roanoke Island.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good to know. Which is not called that anymore.
Well, their goal was to stake England's claim to North America, launch raids on Spanish fleets, and establish a permanent colony. So it was a strategical position for them.
Oh yeah.
So, but the colonies, they actually established friendly relations with the local native tribes that were there, and the tribes would describe the land to the colonists as pleasant and bountiful. But over the years, some of those relations broke down. And especially with other native groups, not particularly the first one that they spoke to, they had a lack of supplies and internal conflicts within the colonists' political structures, I guess, led to the colony's abandonment in 1586.
Yes.
So in 1587, there was the second attempt.
Well, right. So the first one basically got wiped out. It was logistically, it was a nightmare. And where you said it's bountiful and stuff like that, it's really not. Here's a picture of where it's at, just so you can see for reference. It's still called Roanoke Island. Manteo is the town I was thinking of, right? But it's a swamp. It's North Carolina. The whole thing's a swamp.
Oh,
so it's not exactly like the most habitable, environment to live in. Snakes, no alligators and stuff, but it's just, all that kind of stuff. Spiders and snakes everywhere. There's not a bunch of fields to plant. I mean, obviously there's a lot of farms in that area now, just North Carolina, Virginia in general. But yeah, it's got to be a rough living, and it's really cold.
I mean, plus for the time, the 1500s into the wilderness. I imagine it was a rough. No matter how you try to
wasn't Patagonia jackets and hammocks, it's a different time for sure. Rough living.
Especially those seaside islands can get really rough up there in the winter too.
That's a thing to note. The weather there is absolutely crazy when there's big storms that come through. I mean, you can watch the point of Cape Hatteras, the island that it sits behind, and it'll change directions like over the course of a week just because of storms and wildness. So like you were saying, the first colony was a bust. It was put there for a strategic location. And in theory, it's a good spot because you could hide from ships passing by because there's several entrances to get there. The waterways are very difficult to navigate. That's notoriously where Blackbeard the pirate later on had his camp down in like Ocracoke and Cape Hatteras area, and you had to really understand navigation.
Those towns like in that area, because I've been up in that area before. Like those towns are huge with like pirate tales and like pirate themed restaurants and things like that, and
cool.
museums.
Yeah, totally.
That kind of stuff. But
Yeah. So what we were saying is they decided to go back in 1587, and this is with not Raleigh, but
John White.
John White. So John White, he asked her to bring some of his family over. His daughter, she's pregnant at the time, so they're actually going to make like a foothold and actually like establish an English colony.
Right.
And they were going to shoot for the Chesapeake, from what I understand. But a navigator on board the ship kind of convinced them, hey, we're going to go here. So they end up in essentially the same spot, right?
Right. So that was in 1587.
Yes.
So 1587, he goes in, he kind of helps to establish the colony. And then later that year, he says, hey guys, I got to go back to England. We got to get some supplies and stuff. So this is going to be, it's going to be a voyage. I'll come back.
Makes the however long it took, 6-month trek back to England or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, so it's like 3 to 6 months one way, 3 to 6 months the other way, and and it's not just like running to the store. Like it's a dangerous journey.
Several ships. You got to go. But he, and actually the navigator was pretty well respected, and that's why he was able to convince even John White to do that. Well, so John White wanted to return. Pretty quick.
But it took him 3 years.
Well, there's a reason for that. So England actually, during they were at war with Spain, so they actually kept all the English ships in port, and he couldn't leave, so they were stuck there.
Yeah. Okay. So they were like occupied by enemy fleets. Basically.
Yeah, they're afraid of a invasion from Spain, so they kept all the ships in harbors and stuff like that, and wouldn't let them go. So he's sitting on his hands, like waiting to go back.
He's got family back there in the New World.
He's got family. He's got people. He's kind of in charge of them and stuff, and they want to make this work. So it took a while for him to get back over.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's why it took 3 years. I didn't have any information on that.
Yeah.
So it takes him 3 years to get back, and they were already like running low on supplies, hoping that John White would return with supplies, and he doesn't for 3 years.
Yeah.
So when he returns to the colony, and this is where history has us still scratching our heads to this day. He finds nothing. There's no trace of any of the settlers. I mean, there's still like structures there.
There's still some stuff. They said all the structures were taken down, like purposefully taken down. But the not the rampart, but the wall was still there, like the fence around the colony, which they did build a fence just for like some sort of protection and stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's native people that work there or live there. There's tribes. There's the Spanish occupied part of the area at the time, so they were kind of afraid of all kinds of potential stuff to happen.
Well, there's only one notable clue that we found there, which historians are still curious today as to what it meant, and that was carved into a wooden post near the former settlement was the word Croatoan, and nobody really knows what that means. But there's some theories on what may have happened to the colonists.
Before they left, John White said that they had some sort of secret code. He makes a mention of it in his diary log type situation, and so they knew that they would leave a clue as to where they go. And there was some talk about them moving 50 miles in a direction, whether that was inland or south, because I guess it would kind of be south if they went to Croatoan and integrated with the tribe there, vice going inland just straight towards Raleigh, Elizabeth City, all that stuff. But they left that clue, and the crazy part about this is he wasn't able to go look for him, right? Because he could go to Croatoan, which is now Cape Hatteras, like that's the area, right? But they before they were going to leave, they had an anchor chain break on their secondary anchor for one of the ships, and they said, well, he can't anchor in these crazy rough waters, and so we basically have to go home. So he's kind of like, I don't know if he's talked into going back, but he was never able to establish a search party and really go look for him,
right?
Which leads more to nobody knowing where they went,
right? Yeah.
Obviously, if they went 50 miles away and there's like still like the people are there, they'd be like, oh, okay, cool, like we're over here now. But
there's four leading theories onto what happened to the colonists of Roanoke. The first of which being it was a native attack by one of the less friendly tribes in the area, and the colonists were possibly killed or abducted by Native Americans,
right?
Especially the Croatoan tribe who lived nearby.
So they were peaceful. The Croatoan,
which makes you wonder, But then again, that asks the question, like, well, if it was a native attack, like why was everything so neatly disassembled? why didn't they just burn it down? Unless maybe they wanted to
Right.
strip it of resources or something.
Could be reuse the lumber and stuff.
Yeah, could be. So that's a prevailing theory, and it makes sense. There's another one that suggests that they, having run out of supplies, they were just going to try to sail back home. Like, hey, we can't survive here. We got to turn around and go back.
That's a bold move.
That's a bold move, especially if you're lacking on supplies and you want to go out there. You want to go out there across the sea. It's that's a tough one. But some believe that the settlers tried to turn around and go back. There was another theory, and this one makes sense, that there was a Spanish invasion. Spanish forces that marched up from Florida because they had a heavy foothold here in Florida at the time. And the Spanish invasion might have had something to do with it. They could have attacked and killed the settlers. There was, and then there's another theory, and I think you said this is the one that you think probably happened, is they just left and integrated with the native tribes. Now, that's a popular theory. They moved inland and were just kind of absorbed into those tribes, possibly the Croatoan tribe. Possibly. Which you said, and that could be the meaning behind the word Croatoan, because it's hard to leave a note, so you just like, hey, we're with them now,
You can't leave like a piece of paper blow away or whatever.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Especially if it takes 3 years for someone to get back.
And if there's not a big rock to chip a whole story into, I guess you're not doing that either, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that one actually has a lot of weight to it. That maybe, and it could be a combination of those, right? Maybe a few people decided to sail back. Maybe a few people got killed and then they decided to integrate. I mean, there could be several scenarios going on here, but it kind of makes sense that they would do this for resources, right? Two, there's a lot of weird stories. They talk about like aliens. Sorry, wrong episode. They talk about like people that live there having gray eyes and stuff that have like British kind of features and things.
Yeah.
So that would make sense that there's like sons and daughters that kind of take on the look of both cultures.
I know that in speaking of having those features in 2007, I don't think this really turned up any evidence or anything, but they actually started doing DNA collection.
Yeah, I read about that quite a bit
from local families and the people who had descended from the native tribes that lived in the area,
and people that share the last names with the settlers and stuff like that.
They started doing DNA testing just to see if there was any connection to the lost colonists or anything, and I don't think it ever really turned any results.
Well, actually, it wasn't John White, but it was somebody with like a Baker was their last name or something like that, and They tested his DNA and it came back that it's not a definitive match. It just came back that the lab that did it was out in Utah, I think, that he had a good combination of English DNA and Native American DNA that was split and could theoretically be a descendant, like an ancestor of those people. But I mean, it doesn't say, hey, this is definitely because they had a manifest of who was there and stuff like that. But you don't know. I
mean, it stands to reason that
generations,
it stands to reason that, they're at some point, you settle there and there's people there. Like at some point, people are going to integrate and, create new families and things with the native tribes there. I'm a result of that. Like my great grandfather was an Irish immigrant.
Okay.
And he came over and married a Cherokee woman.
Cool.
And that's how my grandfather was born. You know what I mean? So I mean, and I think that's why a lot of us have a lot of native blood in us, because it's been integrated over the years.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's not entirely unfeasible to say like, oh yeah, we found people that have native DNA. Like, yeah, you're gonna find a lot of people. Now, were they from that colony? We don't know, but it's feasible. It's very feasible that they just integrated with the native tribes.
It makes sense though. I mean, it's rough living.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was tribes all over North America. So they can't live here. I mean, it's not impossible. People live here now, obviously, in big cities and stuff. A little different. But it kind of, just to cultivate the land, make the resources. Plus, they've also found some artifacts that are associated with the time period.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So yeah, and I think you have a little bit on that, because they started doing some research into it, focusing on archaeological discoveries and things like that, and they found some things. They found some pottery, I think from the 15th century, and which indicated that there was the presence of a Native American village near the site,
right? And they've got English pottery as well, I think. So like things that are appropriate to the time period. Now they find a lot of newer stuff too, obviously, because like you said, the pirates were hanging out there and a bunch of other things over the years.
Sure.
But they haven't found any like cannons or anything, but they have found a sword that's appropriate to the time frame.
Right. They also
or
found
part of a sword.
They also found a copper ring that the settlers might have traded with the natives.
Oh, that makes sense.
Who valued they valued copper for they believed it had a spiritual significance to it. So if you have a copper ring, like that's something you can trade with for for food or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen they found parts of machinery like parts of pistols, like flintlock systems and stuff like that. Little bits of that. Usually you find like I don't know farming equipment and things like that, but I didn't read anything about that specifically.
Right. Well, they did. There was another nearby village, a native village that was likely palisaded and housed an elite warrior class within the walls, and lower status individuals like that likely lived on nearby farmsteads. So that suggests the possibility of a settler Native American contact and potentially the absorption of some of the Roanoke settlers into that village. Now, if whether they went willingly or they were taken by force, like we just don't know.
Right. I don't think there's any way we're ever going to truly know that.
Unless we do some remote viewing, which we're talking about, in the next episode. So come on back for that.
That is a good point.
But and you mentioned
there's a couple maps too that were drawn, and talking about the 50-mile thing, and there was I can point to it on the map here. They did patches on some of those original maps, and it had a square. And a lot of people, a square was a common thing for a fort. Like they went and established another fort, but the maps are covered up with new map basically that goes over the top of it.
You're right,
and you can see there's even like they said invisible ink on one of them of that so you could still see it. I don't know if that's really true or just the ink bleeds through the bottom of the map itself. But they said that also could have been put there originally as a decoy on the map. Like, oh, we have a base here, but it's really just more swampland or woods or whatever. So there's nothing really definitive there, but there are marks that have been corrected. Corrections on some of the maps of what could be a base or something like that. And also, I do know that there used to be like 3 entrances to get to Roanoke Island. And now like one of them filled in on Cape Hatteras at some point. So they only had 2 to get there. So it was a little bit harder to navigate, as the years went on.
Right.
But then again, we also, they also established a colony just north of there in Jamestown in 1600. So another 10 years after John White's return to the island, they ended up having a successful one closer to the Chesapeake, which I think was the original goal anyway. Yeah. Of that. And, I doubt the people, it's not too far away, but.
Yeah, I don't know. But it definitely is feasible for sure. I know this also. They found a gold signet ring on Hatteras Island, which was dated back to the 16th century. Oh. So so that kind of like all right, and you said that's the neighboring island. Yeah. So it could be possibly they moved islands. And that was in 1998, and in 2009, archaeologist Mark Horton led a dig. Which uncovered a lot of strange artifacts on Cape Hatteras. Let's see, we had a slate piece that had remnants of writing, possibly used as a writing tablet.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, there was that rapier hilt that you spoke about that was discovered by Mark Horton, and a copper and iron bar, indicating that there was significant trade between these 2 civilizations, and that really makes us think like, well, if they were trading for so long, maybe they just said, hey, we're going to come into your land and build, and we'll just live with you. And
well, it also makes sense if some people get sick. 111 people or something like that it was.
Yeah.
I say or something like that because I've read 116 as early, and 118, 111. That could be just the manifest vice. They knew there was other people there, right?
Right.
A couple more. Not everybody's name ended up on it. But that being said, like a hard flu could, take quite a few people out. Maybe they needed to like integrate with another tribe or something just to keep, to stay alive.
Yeah. Well, there was an excavation at what's now known as Site X, and this is in 2012. And this is a site near Edenton, North Carolina. And it's believed to be a possible settlement location for the Roanoke survivors. Maybe they relocated there at Edenton, North Carolina, what it is today, rather.
Could be.
So they found more pottery. They found gun flintlocks there. a food storage jar, what would have been used as a food storage jar, and copper aglets, which at the time were used to secure wood fibers, which was typical of European century clothing.
Cool.
So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that points to the Edenton, North Carolina Site X space, saying that maybe they just relocated there. But, they also found borderware pottery. And, the food jar and the flintlock suggests that they just kind of moved inland using European goods and then lived among the native tribes. So I think as we dive deeper into this, it's really the most feasible thing is, we had integration. I think like that's really what the evidence points to at this. Like
that's,
they just
kind of my feeling about it, which is it's fascinating, and it's not, obviously it doesn't solve the mystery. Or
no, of course not. But I mean, we can take this and point to the most I don't want to say obvious, but the most feasible outcome is the fact that they continued trading with the indigenous tribes there and eventually just moved further inland and lived with and among the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And when White returned, no trace. Like he's got no idea where to go to start looking for them. So they could have just been living out there,
right?
But there's been no definitive answer found regarding the Roanoke settlers, and but new findings are constantly coming up. So maybe one day we'll have this definitively solved.
Yeah,
it's possible. But yeah, that's the story of Roanoke Island, man. Definitely one of history's greatest mysteries for sure. But final thoughts, takeaways on this one?
I kind of expressed my opinion on where I think they went. I think it's fascinating, and we've talked about adventure on the other show and this show quite a bit, and that's quite an adventure to go like establish a colony somewhere and live there. That's pretty wild, and then you're kind of rolling the dice and hanging it out there on the edge of the planet. We
go camping for fun, and one of the first things we ask is like, well, is there an electrical hookup so I can charge my electronics?
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there a shower?
Did anybody bring a battery?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's definitely a different time, and that's like we started talking about with storms and stuff, a rough place to live in general. So that's
for sure.
It's wild. I think it's a very interesting story for sure.
Yeah. Well, while the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke remains unsolved, the search for answers continues with new discoveries offering more clues that bring us closer to the truth. But perhaps their story is just one that will never truly be lost or solved, just waiting for us to piece it together. For Zumundous Podcast, I'm Doolin.
And I'm Keith.
Remember to stay skeptical, stay curious, stay weird, and keep questioning everything, because you never know what mysteries are waiting to be solved. We'll see you next week, guys. Woo! We'll have to do some remote viewing and find out what happened.
I guess, yeah.
They say that anybody can do it.
That's what I've heard too. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next week. For
that
sure.
institute.
Yeah.
They can teach you to do it.
I want to learn it.
Zumundous.